Hello guys, welcome back to the new video. In this video we will set up our room database for local storage. Before writing the code, let's have a brief intro on Room. Now first of all, what is Room? Room is a popular library for Android app development that makes it easier to work with databases. It's like a toolbox for storing and managing data within your app. In simple terms, Room helps you save and retrieve information efficiently, like user data, settings, or any other data your app needs to keep track of. It serves as an abstraction layer over SQLite, the traditional database system used in Android. It simplifies the process of working with databases, making it less complicated and less error prone, which is crucial for app developers. Room database in Android saves data in a local SQLite database on the user's device. Now let's explore the key components that make up Room database. There are three main components. Entity, this defines the structure of our database tables. DAO, data access object, these interfaces specify the database operations we can perform. And then we have database. It acts as the central access point to our database. Now let's look at these one by one. Data entity. In Room database, a data entity is a plain Kotlin or Java class that represents a single table in the database. Each field in the entity class corresponds to a column in the table, and each instance of the class represents a row in the table. Data entities are used to define the schema of the database and specify how data is structured and stored. As we can see, we will have these three entities in our Smart Study Android application. First entity, we will keep the data related to the subject. Second one for the data related to task. And third one will be the data related to the session. And in the task entity and session entity, we will also keep the subject ID which will be related to these tasks and sessions. So now let's go to the Android Studio and first create these entities. So here let's go to this domain package and here model. So first we have this subject. So what we will do in our application, we will use this subject model as the entity. Generally what happens, we create the entity in our data package that will be specific to that room library. But for the sake of simplicity, we will use these models as a room entity. So to use this subject data class as entity, first we need to annotate this with entity annotation. Let's import this. Let's maximize these imports. So here we can see this entity annotation is coming from that room library. So by annotating this data class with this entity annotation, we are telling to the room database that consider this subject data class as the entity. And one more thing we need to do this. Here we will annotate this value as the primary key. So with this primary key annotation, Room will distinguish these subject entries with this subject ID. So here we will say auto generate to true. So this Room library will generate these IDs auto. And let's make this nullable. So this will not ask us to give this subject ID. And in the same way, let's go to this task data class and first annotate this with entity. And same with this session data class. And this is all for our data class. So let's close these files. Now let's move on to the next thing. DAO, data access objects, that provide methods that your app can use to query, update, insert and delete data in the database. Now next we will set up this DAO. So here first let's create one more package with the name data and one more package in this local. Here let's create one interface with the name subject DAO. First thing we need to annotate this interface with DAO annotation. So Room will know that this is our DAO interface. So in this subject DAO interface, we will create all those functions relating to the subject which will interact to the database. So first let me create all these functions. So these will be the 6 functions relating to this subject. So here in the first Upsert function, we will insert or update the subject. So for this Upsert in Room database, we have a query with the name Upsert. And let's press Ctrl Q. So here we can read with the help of this annotation, it will insert its parameter into the database if it does not already exist. If it is already exists, then it will update its parameters in the database. So here we will provide this subject and either it will insert the subject or update the subject. Next we have this get total subject count. Here we will be needing the total number of subject. So for this there is no specific annotation, but we need to write the whole query. So here let's provide the query with the help of this query annotation. Here we will write the query. So this select is a keyword in the SQLite. It will help us in selecting the thing whatever we write here onward. So we need the count. Again this is also a keyword. So we will provide the count. We need the count of every row. So we will just provide this star. This star represent to the all. So we need the count of all rows from subject. Here when we press the Control B to this subject, so it will navigate us to this subject entity we created. So here we have written this query, select count of every row from subjects. So in this way we will get the total number of subject counts. So in the same way, let's write the query of this function. So here I have written this query, select sum of goal hours. So here this goal hour, let's press Ctrl B. This goal hour is the value in this subject entities. So we will total the sum of this goal hour value from our subject entity, and then we will get the total number of goal hours. Now in the same way, let's write the query of this function. So here this query is select everything from this subject entity where subject ID is equal to this subject ID we will provide. So here whatever subject ID we will provide, so it will check the subject entity and get the subject where this subject ID column will match to this provided subject ID. And for the next function, let's copy this query, and here instead of this select we will delete from subject where subject ID will be equal to the provided subject ID. And the query for the last function will be very simple. Here let's copy this, and here we won't provide any subject ID, but rather we will select every row from this subject entity. So here we can see in our DAO, either we just simply annotate the function with the required annotation if room provide that specific annotation. If there is no specific annotation, then we will write the whole query. Now one more thing we need to do. Right now we can see we are not using any coroutine. So here room library also supports coroutine. So here what I will do, either I will use the suspend or I will use the flow. First let me use for all these function, then I will explain the difference between these two. First function we will use with this suspend keyword, and for the second function we will use flow, this one coroutine, and in this also let's use flow, and here let's use suspend for this function, and for this function also let's use suspend, and for the last function let's use flow. So here why I have used suspend keyword for some function and the flow return for some other functions. So to distinguish between these two, we need to look, is that function is a one-time event or a continuous flow of data. So for the first function, when we will insert the subject, here this is a one-time event. When we press the save button in our UI, so that subject will be saved into that subject entity. And for the second function, get total subject count, here we will look continuously to this count. There will be no button to check the number of count, but rather we need to display the number of counts of the subject. Whenever there will be change in the number of subject, so that display should also update instantly without the user's action. That's why we are using flow in this. In the same way, here we will also update this total goal hours by itself if there is any change in this subject entity. And for the next function, get subject by ID, here we will just get the subject one time whenever user will navigate to the subject screen. And for the next function, again, whenever user will click the delete button, then we will only call this function. So this is a one time action. And for the last function, here we will display all the subject in the UI through subject cards. So there will be no button for checking the total number of subject, rather it should automatically update by itself all those subjects. So this is the main difference between using flow or suspend. We check either it is one time event, then we use suspend, otherwise it is a continuous flow of data, then we use flow. So this is all for our subject DAO. Now in the same way we will create the task DAO and then session DAO. So let's create one more interface with the name task DAO. So here I will write all the code relating to this task DAO. So here I have written all this code relating to the task DAO. So all these functions are very similar to the subject DAO. Now in the same way, let's create one more interface with the name session DAO. So here these all will be our functions relating to the session DAO. These all are very similar to the subject DAO function and are very self-explanatory. Now let's move on to the next thing. Next we have our database class. It holds the database and serves as the main access point for the underlying connection to your app's persisted data. Here we specify all our DAOs and all the entities. So let's go back to the Android Studio and here create one file with the name app database. This will be a abstract class and here let's extend this with room database, this class. And first thing we need to annotate this abstract class with the database annotation. Here we can see this annotation is also coming from the room library and here we need to provide all our entities. So in our database we will be having three entities. First one will be this subject. We will specify like this. So let's provide the other two also. Like this. Now next thing we need to specify the version. So here we are creating our schema first time, then we will provide the version 1. But in the future we somehow change our schema. Schema means in what ways our data will be saved. If we change, then we need to update this version to the next version. And here in our app database class, next thing we need to specify all our DAO. So let's use this abstract function and here let's use the subject DAO and in the same way let's use the other two. So this is our app database class. Now one more thing we need to do. Let's go to our subject entity and here one of our value is this list of colors. How can a cell hold a list of colors? So if we provide the list of colors to this subject entity color column, then this room will complain how I can hold number of values in a single cell. So we need to define a way in which room can hold the list of color values in a single cell. So for that we will create a type converter class. So here in our local package, let's create one more class with the name color list converter. So here let me create two functions, then I will explain. So first function room will use to save the data into the database, and the second function it will use to retrieve that data from the database. So what's the first function? So here I will provide the color list. This will be a list of integers and I will convert that list into a string value. So in this way that particular cell can hold a string value. Here when we retrieve the value from the room database, we will use this function. So in that particular cell there will be a string value. So we will take that string value and will split with the help of this comma, because we already used this comma to join these integer value into the int, and then we will map it to this list of integer. So this is how these two functions will be used. So here we need to annotate these functions with this type converter annotation. So room should know that these function will be used to convert some value from and to the entity. So let's use this annotation also for this function. And let's go back to our app database, and here let's also define that we also have a type converter. So here we will use this type converters, this plural one, and you can also see here I have used this singular one. So here let's specify our color list converter class. So this was all the code relating to the room database. So we have set up our room database. For this room database, there is one more thing we need to do, that is creating an object of this room database. So this thing we will do in the next video, where we will write all the code for the dependency injection. So this is all for this video, and do subscribe if you don't want to miss the next video. Thanks for watching.